On May 5, 1873, Dr. William York had been missing for 3 weeks when his brother Colonel Alexander York rode into southeastern Kansas with a group of investigators. What they uncovered beneath the floorboards of an abandoned inn near Cherry Vale would go down as one of the most chilling murder cases in American history. Behind the modest 2-story building, they found 11 bodies buried in shallow graves, victims of a carefully concealed slaughter. The killers were gone, but the evidence left behind told its own story. Blood-stained hammers, a trap door reeking of death, and whispers of a young woman named Kate Bender, a spiritualist who claimed she could speak to the dead. For more than 20 years, the Bender family ran their operation along one of Kansas's busiest trails, and Kate was their most effective lure. Her charm, intelligence, and ruthless cunning made her the perfect predator in a land where strangers often relied on one another just to survive. The Kansas frontier in the 1870s was unforgiving a place, where travelers pushed west along the Osage Mission Trail toward Colorado and California. This dusty, rutted road cut through endless prairie grass, broken only by scattered groves of cottonwoods and lonely homesteads barely visible against the horizon. Every 20 or 30 miles, small settlements offered little more than a general store, a blacksmith, maybe a saloon, and a handful of cabins. Doctors were 50 miles away, lawmen even farther, and communication between towns depended on mail carriers and traveling merchants who might not appear for weeks. In that kind of isolation, an innkeeper was more than just a host. They were a source of news, a place to rest, and sometimes even a trusted banker for travelers afraid of carrying too much money. Families on the prairie depended on such stops, and the Benders knew it. That trust was the mask they wore. The Bender family arrived in Kansas in the late 1860s, though their origins were hazy even to their neighbors. John Bender, a man in his 60s, with a heavy German accent and broken English, bought a 160-acre homestead 8 miles northeast of Cherry Vale. The property sat in a perfect spot along the trail at the crest of a hill, where weary travelers would naturally stop before moving into the valley beyond. The house itself, painted white with a red roof, was visible from miles away across the flat prairie. John's wife, Elvira, was a severe woman in her 50s who spoke little to outsiders. Most neighbors recalled her answering only in grunts or short nods, leading many to believe she didn't speak English at all. Together with Kate and John Jr., they created a place of refuge that doubled as a trap. Behind the polite greetings and warm meals, the Benders concealed a nightmare that would haunt Kansas history for generations. Elvira Bender's hostility was so constant that most travelers quickly learned to avoid her altogether, preferring to deal with the other members of the family. The household also included 2 grown children. John Jr., a slow-witted man in his 20s, was physically strong but mentally limited, often staring blankly at visitors while his sister handled conversation. His role was mostly manual labor around the homestead, and neighbors occasionally hired him for work that required muscle but little thought. Kate Bender, on the other hand, was the family's true weapon. At 24, she was striking in both looks and presence, nearly 6 feet tall with piercing blue eyes and dark hair styled in ways uncommon for frontier women. Unlike her parents, Kate spoke fluent English with only a trace of a German accent, suggesting more education than most immigrant daughters of her station. She was intelligent, confident, and knew how to turn on charm when it served her. Yet what made her unforgettable was her reputation as a medium. Kate claimed she could speak with the dead, heal the sick with herbs, and offer guidance through seances and fortune readings. Spiritualism was sweeping the nation in the years after the Civil War, and her skills drew curious travelers who sometimes made special detours just to consult her. At the Bender Inn, Kate entertained guests with ghostly tales, fortune cards, and elaborate rituals that seemed to pierce the veil between worlds. Many left convinced of her powers and spread her name across the prairie. The Bender home itself was a solid limestone structure 2 stories high, with its front half serving as a general store and its back half as dining space and lodging. A wagon canvas hung from the ceiling to divide the room, creating a sense of privacy while the family conducted their business. The location prices and the allure of Kate's seances made the inn a popular stop. Neighbors and travelers alike considered the Benders hard-working German immigrants, contributing to the growth of their community. Kate attended socials, joined discussions about schools and churches, and even helped raise funds for civic projects. Her reputation was such that locals speculated she might marry one of several prominent men in the area. Outwardly, the Benders fit into their community. But beneath that surface, rumors of vanished travelers began to build. People had long gone missing on the prairie, and it was easy to blame Indian raids, wild animals, bandits, or simple misfortune in a landscape that could swallow the unprepared. Over the past 5 years, the number of unexplained disappearances along the Osage Mission Trail had increased. Yet the losses were scattered, and communication between distant settlements was so poor that few noticed a pattern. A merchant who never reached his destination might be assumed delayed by weather. A family headed west might be presumed to have settled elsewhere. On the chaotic frontier, people often vanished without explanation and without much alarm. But Dr. William York was different. He was not a nameless settler or wandering trader. He was a physician respected and connected with family who would not simply let his disappearance be written off as another casualty of the prairie. His absence in March of 1873 became the spark that tore away the Bender family's carefully built facade and revealed the nightmare lurking beneath. Dr. William York was no ordinary traveler. As a respected physician in Fort Scott, he kept strict schedules and professional appointments that made his movements predictable and his absence immediately concerning. He was also the brother of Colonel Alexander York, a prominent Kansas politician with the influence and determination to demand answers. Dr. York carried himself with the assurance of an educated professional, the kind of man unlikely to be cowed by frontier dangers or to disappear without explanation. On March 9, 1873, he set out from Fort Scott toward Independence, stopping at the Bender Inn as the sun dropped low over the prairie. He arrived on horseback, dressed neatly, carrying fine saddlebags filled with medical instruments and supplies valuables that spoke of his profession and prosperity. Several witnesses later recalled seeing him in lively conversation with Kate Bender. She welcomed him warmly, showing keen interest in his work and claiming knowledge of herbal remedies, a subject she suggested they could discuss over dinner. Dr. York, who enjoyed intellectual conversation, seemed pleased to find such company. As the evening went on, Kate regaled him with tales of her spiritual abilities, even offering a reading to help guide his future medical practice. She asked about his travel schedule, how often he rode the trails, and whether others would notice if he failed to arrive at his next appointments. At the time, these questions seemed natural enough. But the doctor never reached Independence. The next morning, when he failed to appear for scheduled patient visits, alarm spread quickly. Unlike most frontier wanderers, his absence could not be ignored. Within hours, search parties were organized. Inquiries led back to the Bender Inn, where the family claimed Dr. York had departed at dawn, refusing breakfast and intent on making up lost time. Kate even appeared concerned for his safety, offering to conduct a séance to learn his fate. Before a group of anxious neighbors, she slipped into a trance and spoke in a chilling, otherworldly tone, describing visions of the doctor attacked by Indians or bandits far to the west. Her performance was so convincing that it drew tears from some in attendance and shifted suspicion away from her family, sending searchers down false trails. But Colonel Alexander York was not swayed by visions or excuses. A Civil War veteran with a sharp investigative mind, he rode into Labette County determined to retrace his brother's steps. His methodical inquiry uncovered troubling inconsistencies in the Bender's story, and soon revealed a darker pattern. Other travelers had vanished along the same route in recent years. In 1871, George Lonar, a German immigrant carrying his life savings sewn into his clothes, was never seen again. In 1872, cattle driver Ben Brown disappeared after collecting payment for a herd. A family named Mackenzie vanished without a trace, their wagon and belongings lost as if swallowed by the prairie itself. Each case had one detail in common: the victims were last seen at or near the Bender Inn. Because the disappearances occurred months or years apart and were handled by separate authorities, the pattern had gone unnoticed until Colonel York gathered the evidence. What emerged was chilling. Kate's reputation as a spiritualist, her beauty and charisma, and her supposed gift of communication with the dead had all been carefully crafted to draw victims into her family's orbit. As investigators dug deeper, it became clear that the Bender operation stretched far beyond one roadside inn, suggesting a criminal enterprise that may have claimed dozens of lives across the frontier. As investigators traced Kate Bender's past, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Records from surrounding counties revealed that a woman matching her striking description, sometimes calling herself Kate Gart, sometimes Kate Miller, had operated as a spiritualist in at least 3 towns across Kansas and Missouri in the 5 years before the murders came to light. Each time she established herself along well-traveled routes, built a reputation for psychic powers, and stayed close to relatives who ran boarding houses or inns catering to travelers with money or goods worth stealing. In Parsons, Kansas, between 1868 and 1870, Kate Gart advertised herself in local papers as a gifted medium offering messages from the dead, miraculous cures and guidance in moments of grief. Residents recalled her as articulate and attractive, a woman who could describe the fate of missing persons in unnervingly specific terms. Yet during her stay, at least 4 travelers carrying valuables disappeared along routes that passed her family's boarding house. She left Parsons suddenly in the spring of 1870, abandoning clients who had already paid for future sessions and claiming a divine calling to move west. Soon after, Kate Miller surfaced in Chautauqua, Kansas. There she expanded her act to include palm readings, card interpretations, and elaborate spiritual ceremonies that drew in wealthy clients. Locals remembered her uncanny predictions, especially when she convinced a cattle buyer named James Patterson to sit for a private consultation. He was seen entering the boarding house one evening, but never came out. The next day, her relatives claimed Patterson had received a spiritual message urging him to head immediately for Colorado. Patterson vanished, and that same night, Kate Miller slipped away, leaving only a note about a vision that called her to new work in western Kansas. These episodes painted Kate not as a mere accomplice, but as the mastermind of a traveling criminal enterprise. The family seemed to move deliberately from place to place, preying on prosperous targets until suspicion grew, then vanishing to set up again under a different name. Kate's spiritual role provided the perfect cover. Her seances and readings gave her plausible reasons to ask intimate questions about money, family ties, and travel plans. Clients shared details they would never have revealed to a stranger, convinced they were receiving messages from the dead. Survivors later recalled how she disguised probing questions as spiritual revelations, weaving personal details into her performances until people were convinced she truly had access to the other world. Investigators discovered she had studied the methods of professional spiritualists and mentalists, mastering the tricks of cold reading, stage manipulation, and suggestion. An extensive library of books on herbal medicine, occult practice, and deception revealed how carefully she had trained herself to maintain her illusion of supernatural power. Most chilling were the records hidden inside her bedroom wall. Written in Kate's hand, they cataloged dozens of clients' notes about finances, family situations, travel schedules, and weaknesses she could exploit. Many of the names matched missing persons reports from across Kansas and Missouri, stretching back a decade. The documents also contained descriptions of killing methods, disposal techniques, and strategies to avoid detection evidence of a calculated, organized system of murder. What emerged was not the story of a single violent family, but the outline of a far-reaching operation led by a woman whose intelligence and cruelty made her one of the most dangerous predators on the American frontier. Colonel York, who had come seeking the fate of his brother, now realized he was facing something far worse than a botched robbery or a crime of desperation. The Benders had created an enterprise of death, and Kate Bender was at its center. By the spring of 1873, the people of Labette County had reached their breaking point. Rumors, disappearances, and whispered suspicions had piled too high to ignore, and when Colonel Alexander York declared his intention to search the Bender property armed with legal authority from the territorial government and supported by a growing force of determined locals, the family's carefully built image of respectability began to crack. At first, local officials had hesitated to interfere with what seemed like an ordinary innkeeping family. But as evidence of their involvement in multiple disappearances mounted, public opinion turned sharply. Even neighbors who once defended the Benders now admitted to troubling encounters. Kate, who had always carried herself with poise and conviction, revealed the first fissures in her facade. Instead of welcoming the investigation as a chance to prove innocence, she grew restless, her stories more desperate and erratic. She warned that malevolent spirits were outraged by the inquiry and threatened terrible curses on those who disturbed the property. What had once seemed like confidence now looked like panic. Witnesses began to come forward with disturbing accounts. Martha Stevens, a neighbor 2 miles away, recalled seeing the Bender men digging by lantern light in their orchard long after nightfall, not planting trees as she once assumed, but digging holes. Samuel Rogers, a merchant who often stayed at the inn, remembered Kate's probing questions about his trade routes and the valuables he carried. On his last visit, he woke in the middle of the night to find her rifling near his belongings, though she quickly claimed she was only checking that nothing had been stolen. Then there was Thomas McBride, a farmer who had hired John Bender Jr. for heavy work. He recalled unsettling conversations in which the younger Bender described in chilling detail how a person could be killed without leaving evidence, even offering anatomical explanations far beyond what anyone expected of a simple-minded farmhand. At the time, McBride had dismissed the remarks as ramblings, but in the shadow of the investigation, they took on a sinister weight. As suspicion closed in, Kate doubled down on her role as spiritualist. Her seances became increasingly dramatic, designed to sway the community and redirect suspicion. During one elaborate performance before local leaders, she claimed to channel the spirit of Dr. York himself, adopting a strange voice and describing his supposed death at the hands of distant bandits. But her act faltered. She misstated facts about his medical practice, invented family members, and described a man who bore little resemblance to the physician the community knew. Instead of convincing her audience, she exposed the limits of her deception. The turning point came when Colonel York secured official permission to conduct a full search of the Bender homestead. Backed by lawmen from Topeka and a host of armed volunteers from surrounding towns, the search was set for May 5, 1873. News spread quickly, drawing crowds from across the region who wanted to see justice served in what had become the most infamous case in Kansas history. For Kate Bender, this was the reckoning she had long feared, a scrutiny she could not charm, deceive, or terrify away. The investigators would search every room, dig up every suspicious patch of earth, and question each family member with methods her spiritual theatrics could no longer escape. On the morning of May 4th, 1873, just one day before the official search was set to begin, the case took a stunning turn. A neighbor riding past the Bender property noticed something unusual. No smoke rising from the chimney. No movement in the yard. None of the signs of life that typically marked the family's early mornings. Curious, he stopped and found the inn eerily silent and abandoned. Inside, it was clear the family had fled in haste, leaving behind valuable possessions they surely would have taken if they had planned their departure. Panic, not preparation, had driven them into the night. The disappearance of the Benders transformed the case from a local investigation into one of the largest manhunts in frontier history. Yet what they left behind revealed horrors that no one in Kansas or America would soon forget. Colonel York and his team entered the inn and began a systematic search. It wasn't long before they noticed dark, irregular stains on the floorboards near the canvas partition in the main room. Rugs and furniture had been arranged to hide them, but the pattern was unmistakable blood soaked deep into the wood and seeping into the beams below. The location directly beneath the dining table where guests had sat suggested a gruesome ritual of repeated killings carried out in the same spot for years. When investigators pried up the boards, they discovered a hidden trap door, expertly crafted with hinges that opened silently, and a locking system designed to ensure no one below could escape. Beneath it lay a root cellar, but this was no ordinary storage space. The earthen floor was drenched in blood churned into a foul-smelling mud. The walls bore spattered stains, and the ceiling showed impact marks from brutal blows. Every inch of the space spoke of systematic violence. The tools of murder were still there. Hammers with dried blood and hair clinging to their heads, knives streaked with evidence of repeated use, and a massive wooden mallet stained dark from countless strikes. Investigators also uncovered a crude but effective pulley system designed to hoist bodies through the trap door and carry them to burial sites without direct handling. Grooves along the cellar walls showed where corpses had been dragged again and again. What horrified investigators most was the deliberate design of the space. This was not an improvised cellar repurposed for crime. It was built for killing. The floor sloped intentionally to drain blood. The ventilation was arranged to control odor, and every modification revealed planning far beyond the chaotic violence typical of frontier crime. It was a chamber engineered for murder, cold and businesslike in its efficiency. Every detail of the hidden cellar proved it was not a storage room adapted for crime, but a chamber purpose-built for killing. The Benders had designed it with chilling precision, ensuring it functioned as both a murder site and a disposal system. But the true scale of their crimes only became clear once investigators turned their attention outside. Behind the house, the family's orchard stretched across the property rows of apple trees that seemed to promise nothing more sinister than future harvests. Yet, as investigators began probing the ground, they discovered that the orchard was no orchard at all, but a cemetery. The trees had been planted deliberately over graves, their roots serving as camouflage for freshly disturbed soil. The first body was unearthed on May 5th, just 3 feet beneath a young apple tree. It was Dr. William York. His skull had been shattered by repeated blows from a heavy object. Almost certainly the mallet recovered from the cellar. His belongings, his medical bag, money, and instruments were gone. But his body had been left clothed, placed hastily in the ground. The discovery erased any doubt of the Benders' guilt. But it also raised a terrifying question: how many others lay buried beneath the orchard? Systematic digging soon revealed grave after grave. Subtle changes in the soil and vegetation marked each site, and with every excavation, the horror deepened. By the end, 10 more bodies were pulled from the earth. The victims ranged from children to the elderly, proof that the Benders had shown no mercy. Their sole criteria was opportunity travelers with valuables who would not be missed quickly. The adult victims all shared the same fate. Their skulls bore the crushing fractures of blunt force trauma delivered from behind. The wounds were uniform in angle and depth, suggesting a practiced method. The grim routine became clear. Guests were seated at the dining table with their backs to the canvas partition, precisely over the hidden trap door. Kate would distract them with conversation or spiritual readings, keeping their eyes fixed on her. Then the killer would strike from behind, delivering a single devastating blow. Once dead, or nearly so, the bodies were dropped through the trapdoor into the cellar and eventually buried beneath the orchard. But one grave revealed a horror beyond even the worst expectations. The remains of 10-year-old Marianne Mackenzie were discovered in a shallow grave near the vegetable garden, separate from her parents. Unlike the adults, she had not died from a blow to the head. She had been buried alive. Her small body told the story, arms raised, fingers splayed upward, nails packed with dirt. She had clawed desperately toward the surface, struggling for air until she suffocated in the dark earth. The disturbed soil above her grave confirmed she had lived for minutes, perhaps hours after being entombed. For hardened lawmen, men who had seen the worst of frontier violence, this was something altogether different. Robbery and murder were grimly common on the open trails. But this was cruelty refined into ritual suffering, inflicted with cold deliberation. The Bender orchard was not just a crime scene. It was a testament to years of hidden evil, thriving behind the mask of a respectable family. The murders at the Bender Inn had already shocked Kansas. But it was the evidence surrounding little Marianne's death that revealed the true depths of the family's cruelty. Killing travelers for money was one thing. Murdering children who carried no wealth and posed no threat spoke to a level of depravity beyond rational explanation. And when investigators examined Kate Bender's abandoned belongings, they found something even more disturbing: a diary that opened a window into the mind of a killer. The diary's entries were clinical, detached, and utterly without remorse. Kate did not describe the murders as crimes or even as necessary means of survival. Instead, she wrote as if conducting experiments, carefully recording methods, reactions, and the length of time it took victims to die. She convinced herself she was performing a service, guiding souls more efficiently into the next world. In her twisted logic, the dead were grateful, their spirits allegedly speaking to her in seances afterward, assuring her that they had been set free. But the diary went further. Kate described her obsession with what she called spiritual acceleration, a series of experiments designed to test how quickly and cleanly a soul could be separated from the body through violence. She compared killings at different hours of the day, tried various methods, and treated families as perfect case studies, noting differences between parents and children as if she were cataloging results in a laboratory. Entire families slaughtered not just for profit, but for the sake of her grotesque research. Even more alarming were entries hinting at expansion. Kate had been corresponding with associates as far away as Colorado and California, laying the groundwork for a broader network of so-called mediums who could lure in victims under the guise of spiritual consultations. Her vision was chillingly modern, a frontier crime syndicate cloaked in mysticism, preying on travelers across the West, while avoiding suspicion through her reputation as a healer and psychic. As investigators sifted through her notes, the scope of the Bender's crimes came into focus. The orchard graves confirmed at least 11 murders on their Kansas property. But the diary suggested the real number stretched back years and across state lines. Lists of names corresponded to missing persons reports from Kansas and Missouri, pointing to victims long before the family settled near Cherryvale. Kate's writings hinted at consultations that ended in death, leaving behind nothing but vanished travelers and grieving families who never knew what became of their loved ones. Colonel Alexander York had come to Kansas searching for the truth about his brother. What he uncovered was far worse than he or anyone else could have imagined. Not just a single case of robbery and murder, but the story of America's first documented family of serial killers. For over 2 decades, the Benders had operated in plain sight, moving from one community to the next, adapting their methods, and always staying one step ahead of suspicion. Their inn, their orchard, and Kate's diary together revealed one of the largest and most horrifying killing sprees in American frontier history. Even as investigators uncovered the full extent of the Bender family's crimes, the killers themselves were already gone. On the night of May 4th, 1873, the Benders slipped into the darkness and vanished, leaving behind only their orchard of graves and a legacy of terror. Their disappearance denied the frontier community its justice and ensured that many questions about their methods, motives, and ultimate fate would remain unanswered. The manhunt that followed was one of the largest and most publicized of the 19th century. Posses spread out across Kansas, Missouri, the Indian Territory, and beyond. Lawmen, bounty hunters, and vigilantes alike chased down every rumor, every supposed sighting, fueled by substantial rewards offered for the family's capture. Newspapers across the country printed breathless reports, turning the Benders into household names and feeding a wave of fear that swept across the West. Kate's appearance made her particularly difficult to forget. Tall, striking, and unusually well-spoken, for a frontier woman she was the subject of hundreds of reported encounters. Some swore they had seen her boarding trains in Missouri. Others claimed she was running seances in Texas, and still others insisted she had been spotted in California mining camps. Yet for all the tips and headlines, not a single confirmed capture ever occurred. The frontier itself aided their escape. With its endless miles of prairie unmarked trails and scattered settlements where strangers were common and questions were few, fugitives could vanish almost as easily as their victims once had. Communities were too far apart, communication too slow, and the terrain too vast to allow for an organized pursuit. Theories about their fate multiplied. Some believed the family slipped south into Mexico, blending into rural German immigrant communities where law enforcement was scarce and political turmoil offered cover. Others insisted they headed west to California, disappearing into gold rush boomtowns, filled with transient populations who never asked about anyone's past. But the most enduring theory was darker, that the Benders never escaped at all. According to frontier whispers, vigilantes may have caught them near the Colorado border. Several witnesses claimed to have seen the family under armed guard, though no bodies were ever produced. Given the era's appetite for swift justice, many believed bounty hunters or outraged citizens executed the Benders on the spot, pocketed the reward money, and buried the evidence far from prying eyes. On a lawless frontier, such an ending was not only possible, but probable. Kate herself became a legend. For decades after reports of her surfaced across the American West and even beyond. Some swore she was running seances in California. Others claimed she had been seen in Texas, Colorado, or even New York. Each rumor reignited. The chilling mystery: had she truly escaped justice, or had she been cut down in silence, her body left in an unmarked grave? The truth was never confirmed. The Bender family disappeared into history as completely as the victims they buried beneath their orchard. Their crimes forever changed how frontier travelers viewed the simple act of stopping at a roadside inn and left behind one of the most enduring mysteries of America's violent past. Rumors of Kate Bender's survival continued to circulate long after her family vanished. In 1874, a woman matching her description was reported in Denver conducting seances for wealthy clients eager for glimpses into the spirit world. 2 years later, she was allegedly seen in San Francisco running a consultation business that catered to prosperous merchants and mining investors. Other reports placed her in Oregon, operating a boarding house along the Columbia River and in the Arizona territory, where she was said to offer herbal remedies and spiritual healing to isolated mining towns. Yet none of these sightings were ever confirmed. Whether Kate truly escaped to continue her dark work or whether these were cases of mistaken identity remains one of the great unanswered questions of the case. Back in Kansas, the abandoned Bender property became a grim tourist attraction. Curious crowds flocked to see the house with its blood-stained floors and hidden trap door, the place where America's most notorious serial murders had taken place. Newspapers turned the site into legend, publishing sensational stories that spread the Bender name across the nation. Souvenir hunters eventually stripped the house bare, carrying away floorboards stained with blood and scraps of canvas from the partition that had hidden the murders. The inn itself disappeared, dismantled piece by piece, until only the land remained. But the earth itself seemed unwilling to forget. Crops planted in the orchard, where victims had been buried, never thrived. Some locals blamed poor soil, while others whispered of a curse, the restless dead poisoning the ground with their suffering. Whatever the truth, the land was never again used for hospitality or trade. It stood only as a reminder of the terror that had once lurked there. For the families of the murdered travelers, the discoveries brought grim closure, but little comfort. Dr. William York was buried with full honors in Independence, Kansas, beneath a monument erected to him and the other victims of the Bender family. Hundreds gathered at his funeral, including many who had never met him, but who came to honor the memory of all those who had vanished along the Osage Mission Trail. The case left deep scars on frontier life. The Benders had exploited the very things settlers relied upon most: trust in strangers, and their crimes permanently changed how people viewed roadside inns and isolated families. Travelers grew more cautious, carrying letters of introduction, seeking only reputable establishments and avoiding solitary stops. Law enforcement too changed. The case showed that criminals could slip easily across county lines, and it pushed sheriffs and marshals toward greater cooperation, sharing information about disappearances and fugitives in ways they had not before. The legend of the Bloody Benders endured long after the family vanished. Their crimes forced frontier communities to reckon with the darkest possibilities of human nature and shattered the fragile trust that had once defined hospitality on the open plains. What they left behind was more than a string of graves. It was a cautionary tale about deception, violence, and the dangers of placing faith in the wrong hands. The Bender investigation exposed just how easily a family of killers could operate for years across multiple counties and even states without raising suspicion. It underscored the desperate need for better cooperation between local authorities and systematic tracking of missing persons ideas that would slowly begin to shape the foundations of modern law enforcement. Perhaps most unsettling was Kate Bender's role in it all. Her use of spiritualism as both lure and weapon not only revealed how predators exploit grief and belief, but also offered some of the earliest material for what would later become criminal profiling. Her diary gave investigators a chilling glimpse into the mind of a serial killer, one who rationalized her acts as spiritual mercy, while appearing to neighbors as an educated, respectable young woman. The case also raised a sobering truth. Had Dr. William York not come from a prominent family with a determined brother, the Benders' crimes might never have been uncovered. Their operation was too systematic, too carefully concealed to be exposed by chance. That realization led many to wonder how many other unexplained disappearances across the frontier might have been the work of predators like the Benders their victims written off as casualties of wilderness weather or war. The bloody benders remain a reminder that evil often wears a convincing mask. Kate's charm, intelligence, and supposed gift of spiritual guidance gave her complete power over those who trusted her, allowing her to exploit their deepest needs for comfort and connection before betraying them in the most brutal way imaginable. The American frontier, celebrated as a land of freedom and promise, also created the perfect conditions for such predators to thrive. Isolation, lawlessness, and the constant movement of strangers offered cover that could hide even decades of systematic murder. But the question that lingers more than a century later is what became of the Benders? Did they truly vanish into the vastness of the frontier to continue their crimes elsewhere? Or did frontier justice catch up to them in some quiet corner of the West, their bodies left in unmarked graves, just as they had left their victims? What do you think? Did Kate and her family escape justice, or were they silenced in ways history never recorded? Leave your thoughts below, and if this story kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.